Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
Ahilyabai Holkar would have had to work with a lot of people within very strong-minded personalities, men at that, who would have found it and she would have found it very difficult. But getting over those kind of changes and building a legitimacy to rule, investing in temples as a way to improving the society, were all masterstrokes of genius. So if she would have had to have built a separate school or a hospital, sustainability, all those kind of issues are there. But if it went through the temples, then there was a sustainable ecosystem, and she just was able to use that ecosystem to do good for the community.
Hello and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by the Bangalore International Centre. I'm Srikrishna, and our guest today is Pradeep Chakravarthy, who describes himself as a behaviorist who works on altering behavior using Indian models of learning and development. Pradeep's career across the TVS Group, Cognizant, Infosys, and McKinsey has been in HR and in learning and development. Over the past few years, he is specialized in leading workshops, coaching sessions, and heritage tours that seek to impart leadership and life lessons from Indian history and philosophy. Pradeep is a prolific author and has written 9 books about places, including Tanjavur and Kodaikanal, and the temples of Tamil Nadu. His latest book, Leadership Shastra, Lessons from Indian History, is a compelling read about the lives of well-known historical figures from the 15th to the 19th century India, but with an interesting lens. How can you make history work for you? Pradeep explores what we can take away from the lives of these historical leaders to better ourselves. What exactly does that mean, and why is that important, is what we'll talk about today. Pradeep, welcome to BIC Talks.
Thank you, Krishna. It's a pleasure to be on this call with and working with Bangalore International Centre.
You begin your book with your own journey into history as a young child, and that's now taken shape into your area of work through this book. Talk us through some more about the genesis, really, of Leadership Shastra, Pradeep.
Sure, Krishna. I have been talking about how history can change performance for the last decade. And when I talk about history in this context, I typically hear 2 sets of responses. One set of responses about people saying they hated history in school, they found it boring and irrelevant, and why should I know which king lived from which time to which time, and he died and he conquered these kind of battles, because it doesn't matter to my career or to my goals and aspirations at all. So that's one set. The second set of responses I've heard, or memories of history, is they loved the storytelling of the teacher. So that seems to be more a credit to the storytelling ability of the teacher than to history itself. My understanding of history was very, very different. I had the opportunity to spend my summer holidays in my maternal grandparents' home in the village. And this is a house that is about 10,000 to 15,000 square feet long. And it had been in our family for about 6 generations. And the upstairs, and it's even difficult to think about it living in the metros as we are today. The upstairs alone was about 5,000 square feet. And the rooms had ceilings which were about 25 feet high. And the rooms were filled with junk that belonged to 6 generations. Notebooks, clothes, vessels, broken furniture, toys, you name it, it was there. And I remember very, very vividly in one of those forays into the attic, I saw an old math book that had belonged to some ancestor's nephew or somebody like, I don't even know who it was. And there were these pages which were filled with doodles. And one of the doodles said something like, I hate math. And, the visual was very stark. Here I was holding a book amidst junk and memorabilia that belonged to people way before me. Some of whom I didn't even know their names. I couldn't even pronounce their names. And this book was yellowed, and the font was different, the doodles, the pen ink was different. And yet there was this one sentence that resonated. And at once I felt there was a sense of similarity with history and a sense of dissimilarity as well. Many things I could connect, some of things I could not connect. And that really kind of is one image that I have seen in my experience of history being similar to what I've been going through and different. And really the book's genesis was about getting people to see history from this angle of how it can be similar and yet dissimilar to us, and therefore how can it help us perform better.
And how did that then evolve into historical leaders or leaders from Indian history really, and how is that then built into the book? And we'll come to some of the people that you talk about in the book in just a bit. But just building off of what you said, curious to learn how did that progress?
So at that time, in the summer vacation time, there wasn't much to do in Palangote at that point in time. No TVs at that point in time. Certainly no phones. The only thing I could do was to go to temples in the evening. And there were multiple temples there which had a lot of writing on the wall. And as human beings, I think we seldom pay attention to the writing on the wall. But these images really stuck on in my mind. And at a later point in time, I found out that this writing on the wall, or epigraphs as they are known, were actually legal, political, economic records of the old days that people put on. So call it like a website, if you will, of having the important decisions that were taken by the village community. And one of them, much later when I went to that temple, was in a temple called Thirumayam, where there was a very bitter dispute between two factions of Hindus. And it was so bitter that they were actually killing each other, and they were letting blood on the soil. And the situation was so bad that the local king couldn't sort it out. He had somebody from, well, not Bangalore, but Karnataka, the Hoysala general, who actually came and sorted it out. And what he did was he split the town into two. So it was pretty much like the Berlin Wall partition. And today, if you go there, that community is not there, the wall is not there, and yet we still fight over caste and community and religion and so on. So I wrote an article about this in the Hindu. It got published, and from then on, I started looking at organizations and temples as institutions, and that led to human beings as well. And that's how Leadership Shastra was born.
And I know a theme that stays through is two things, and you dwelled on one, in the Genesis itself around, conflict and interpersonal issues that need sorting, and some of it coming there, and of course the other really being, this desire for everyone to leave an enduring legacy behind for the future. And I think that does come out as a recurring theme. The way I saw it as I read through the book was there are some names that are much more known because of the work that they did, or even the way in which our own history books would have treated them, like the Mughals or Shivaji or Tipu Sultan. But someone like Malik Ambar, with whom you begin the book, I thought it would be interesting to touch upon some of the lesser known names perhaps. And Malik Ambar started his life as a slave, went on to really ruling the Ahmednagar Sultanate in the Deccan, and founded what eventually became the city of Aurangabad. How did you choose someone like him to start the book, Pradeep?
So there were a couple of parameters that I used in selecting the book, because I knew that in a country like India, I'd be spoiled for choice. One was I wanted to keep it as regionally balanced as possible, because there's a lot of criticism that our history is very Mughal-centric for whatever reasons it is. And I wanted to be a part of the solution rather than be a part of the discussion. So you will see South India, East India, which is hardly represented in general history, is represented over here. Malik Ambar was an interesting choice because there was a lot of material available about him. And unfortunately, in India, we've lost out on a lot of our oral tradition. I think we still had this colonial hangover that only the written word is the authentic word. And a lot of our oral traditions, especially for people like Ahilyabai Holkar, I'm sure, or Lachit Borphukan from Assam, there would have been so much more information available, even maybe a couple of decades back. We've lost all of that as older people pass away, and traditional art forms of music and storytelling also disappear. But coming back to Malik Ambar, Malik Ambar was an Ethiopian. He was born in Ethiopia in a tribe, and at some point in time, he gets sold as a slave. He comes to Arabia, he gets converted to Islam, and then he finds his way to the Deccan region, which is Maharashtra and northern Karnataka. I think I'd love for you to just take a pause over here. Imagine in those days, if you were in Maharashtra, in the Deccan region, you would have seen a very, very different set of people as compared to now. There would have been many people from Iran, from Iraq, from Persia in general, and from Arabia, because this place was teeming with people from those regions. So students, truly, absolutely. In fact, I would even say Krishna far more international than the composition is probably today. And at that point in time, imagine a black slave who is a Muslim coming into really the heartland of India and making it big. He was purchased by another slave like himself. And when that slave dies, he gets his freedom. And then because of his sheer dint of entrepreneurship, of his ability to wield the sword and whatever other weapons, he rises to power to become the most important military commander of the Ahmednagar Sultanate. And Malik Ambar is a smart guy. He does not become the Sultan himself. So it's very easy. The Sultan of Ahmednagar at that time, Nizam Shah, was quite a puppet. But he chooses to be the puppet behind the throne and orchestrate the entire foreign policy and the administration of the country without actually being the king himself. So looking back at Malik Ambar, there are many things that you can learn from him. And the couple that I focused on is a sheer sense of entrepreneurship, a never say die attitude, an ability to build a very deep connection with his army. And finally, when he built Kirki, which then became Ahmednagar and now Aurangabad, which Aurangzeb named after himself, a very brilliant sense of town planning, especially water management. I think the way he did his aqueducts at that point in time, they could still teach us a thing or two about how we need to manage our water. So one man, many, many lessons that we can learn from him. And all these stories in the book are of people like this.
And I think you also, not just with Malik Ambar, but with some of the others as well, I think one thing that you highlight is this aspect of, converting bad cards into opportunities, and how, people like Ambar are quick thinkers and capitalizing on all this. But you also say, they're not necessarily born to rule. I mean, I know you talked about it just now, saying, perhaps this whole piece about I'd rather be kingmaker and not be king, which is, I think, also what we see playing out, in today's, both in leadership, both at political levels and elsewhere as well.
True. And then, Krishna, you have on the other side somebody like Sarfoji II.
Right, from Tanjavur, yeah.
Who was tortured as a kid, who was not given his due, and then finally a German missionary and the queens in the court. So again, there are times when queens and women have played the part of being the kingmakers, and he comes to power, but it comes at great price. The British take over everything that he literally owns, and he had a choice at that time. He could have just lived his life in luxury and wine, women, and song, which are the vices of those days. But he didn't. He chose to be a scholar king, and if you look at his path-breaking efforts in education of women, of children, of medical prowess, remarkable kind of person. So all the time, I think the question again and again comes back to we have a choice, and how we exercise our choice speaks a lot about our leadership capacity.
And you talk about women, and I think the two women that you do bring out in the book, Ahilyabai Holkar and Jahanara, who's Shah Jahan's daughter. You talked a little about Ahilyabai Holkar at the start of the conversation. I think her story is known about how she became a ruler and what led to some of that. But in some ways you also, I think somewhere in the book, mentioned that her life is a lot like a startup.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that analogy, Pradeep.
So the ability to start off on the kingdom of at a time when it wasn't very well managed, her ability to build alliances with the tribals, with the traders, bringing new business inside, all of these are indicative of how she's able to manage a very rapidly changing situation that was very much against her. Imagine a woman at that point in time, and all of this. So going back to Malik Ambar, why did kings in India at that time want people from Africa as mercenaries? Because they wouldn't trust their internal courtiers. So Ahilyabai Holkar would have had to work with a lot of people within very strong-minded personalities, men at that, who would have found it she would have found it very difficult. But getting over those kind of changes and building a legitimacy to rule, investing in temples as a way to improving the society, were all masterstrokes of genius. So if she would have had to have built a separate school or a hospital, sustainability, all those kind of issues are there. But if it went through the temples, then there was a sustainable ecosystem, and she just was able to use that ecosystem to do good for the community.
And similarly with Jahanara, again, a woman at that point in time, it was a male-dominated world. She wasn't a queen. Everyone that she was connected with fought amongst themselves, and yet she achieved her own ambitions and was successful. How do you see parallels from how it was for her with what you see in today's world, be it in business or in life, Pradeep?
It is a tragedy that Jahanara, or at least Tipu Sultan, didn't have a copy of Leadership Shastra at that point in time, because if he had read Jahanara's story, he'd have realized that this lady was able to make her mark just by building alliances. And we all know our stories about Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh and Shah Jahan. They were men who were viciously fighting with each other. I mean, they were willing to behead each other. And navigating men at that time, a woman in a male-dominated court, in a male-dominated ethos, was remarkable. I think Jahanara really knew how to navigate, have conversations probably of a strong personality, of learning how to keep these warring men aside and yet work out an independent relationship. And Aurangzeb, after all she did for Shah Jahan, after he came to power, and he came to power with a lot of bloodshed. One of the first things he did was he recognized her as an important woman in the country, literally the first woman, which says a lot about his appreciation and respect for her. And Aurangzeb was a man. I mean, why did everything around Aurangzeb collapse after he died? Because it was always my way or the highway. And if a man like that could respect Jahanara, clearly she must have been a woman of remarkable personality. And to do independent trade at that point of time with the East India Company, to make money, to build the Chandni Chowk, it shows that she was a woman of great enterprise. And I think it comes back to this, I bring about in the book quite often, that we can sit back and list out all the things that are not working, all the things that are going wrong, all the things that will make us fail. And it is very natural to do so. But somewhere, if we continue to do that, I'm sure we'll feel very happy about ourselves and we'll feel very justified in playing the victim card. But people who have found a place in Leadership Shastra are people who've done that, but they've also risen above that and said, okay, I can't control everything. Within what I can control, what can I do?
And I think the other thing that struck me as I read the book was the fact that while you've included leaders from a governance and I guess a royalty or a political standpoint, so the likes of Malik Ambar or Shivaji or the Mughals, there's two groups where you talk about the Sikh gurus and then you also talk about Shankar Deva, where these were essentially religious leaders in that sense and had a following, but obviously operated differently. What led to your sort of choice of featuring bringing in someone like that and bringing in lessons from their lives, and how do you sort of contrast their lives as religious leaders versus the kings or the commanders or the other rulers that you featured, Pradeep?
Krishna, I've always seen religion as a very powerful way to persuade people. And let's face it, from the day we're born till the day we die, either we are being persuaded by somebody to do something or we are persuading somebody else to do something. So anything connected with persuasion excites me and interests me a lot. And I've personally been a great fan of the Sikh work ethic and their contribution to the society, especially the army. So I was very curious to learn more about them. And if you look at my short chapter on the Sikh gurus, I've only looked at 4 of them. One thing that shines out is their ability to set a personal example. Their ability to put what is the need of the community over their personal need. I mean, it was, at least for me, it was a revelation that a Muslim opened the Golden Temple, or was the first devotee. And it was all the small things that they did, and I've had, especially in McKinsey and to some extent in TVS and Infosys, I've had the good fortune of seeing many of the senior leaders up close, and their ability to set a personal example is not by just doing the big things in life, which are of course important, but doing the really, really small things as well. And I think you will see that as well. Shankar Deva and how he brings the community together is a very different case study. 2 things I liked about him was one, and he was, for those of people who haven't read the book, he is the one who really got Vaishnavism in Assam to go the way it is today. 2 things particularly impressed me. One was his ability to use the arts to bring people together. Whether it was the painting scroll or whether it was bhajans together, it was his investment in education. I think this is important because in the old Indian tradition, in every village, the artist community would be paid for by the village, because the arts and the artists would be able to bring out those eternal questions of what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil, what is good for the community, not good for the community. They would do this and they would set the discourse going, and therefore it was seen as a very important ethics and values building system for the community. And to see it was an extremely important ethics and value building system for the community. And Shankar Deva was able to do that, especially music. And when he was able to bring music in, he was able to tap the emotions of people and bring them together. Because at the end of the day, there are always going to be divisions in society, whether we like it or not. But how these people have used personal example and faith to bring people together and unite people, I think made me feel very, very curious to know more about them. And that's something that's important in an organization. At the end of the day, we need teams to work together. So I was hoping that the chapters on Shankar Deva and the Sikh Gurus will help leaders look at how they can bring teams together as well.
Right. And I think for me, what also stood out with when reading about the Sikh Gurus, I thought was also just the way in which succession planning plays out. And how they thought about it back then and how that remains relevant even today.
True. And if you notice Aurangzeb in the chapter on Aurangzeb and the later Mughals, that's one thing they really slip up on for whatever reasons, and it cost them dearly.
And you've touched upon this a little bit, but I do want to get more from you on this, perhaps through some more examples from that you think would work best. The world is very different today, but you make the point that these life stories are still relevant. How so?
I fundamentally believe that human nature has not changed. When Shivaji or Malik Ambar or Aurangzeb or whoever, when they woke up in the morning, I don't think they woke up saying, "Hey, I'm going to get featured in Leadership Shastra and I'm going to have somebody in Bangalore International Center have a chat with me." I think when they woke up with the same issues that we also wake up with, Krishna. What is my need for respect? What will get me to be liked by other people? How will I be remembered after I'm gone? Very, very basic questions. And we all go through these struggles at multiple times during the day, if not just the morning. So these fundamental needs and fears, especially our fears, the fear of being unwanted, fear of being alone, fear of not being mattering to somebody, very, very basic issues. These are not going to change. They have not changed in the past. They're not changed in the present, and they will not change in the future. Of course, technology is going to make things very, very different. Movement is going to make things very different. Language will make things different. Accessibility, information is going to make things very different. But the fundamental needs and fears that we have as human beings is not going to change. So if we can look at historical personalities from these needs and fears, and then connect to that and see what will work for us, and then pick up in our own way, then I think, like I've said in the beginning, when Yudhishthira responds to the Yaksha and says, "What is the most wonderful thing in the world? It's that all of us, every day people are dying, but those who are living think that they are immortal." If we are able to go back and look at how human beings were there in the historical personalities, they have the same needs and fears that I have. What can I learn from them to work with those needs and fears today so that I can perform better at work or at home? Then I think history would have served us well.
But building on that, and I also want to delve a little into what you write in your conclusion, where you say, for us to use history to alter our performance, it is essential to alter our view about history. What do you mean by that, and how have you seen that play out for you?
This is a very important question in these days. A lot of history gets mired into this, what happened at what time, which I'm sure is very important. And maybe that is more important for academics than for people like us who are looking at ways to perform better at work or at home, etc. So while I'm not denying that it is important, I think for us, if we need to make history to work for our performance and for us to live happy lives, we don't need to be so much worried about the dates. Other people can be worried about the dates. We can be worried about the dates for other reasons, but not for this. So when you strip the chronology out and you look at the needs and the fears, it becomes very relevant. The second thing we need to remember is history is in a way recorded by human beings, and human beings come with biases and prejudices. It's just the way we are, because we are human beings. We are not machines. At the end of the day, in science, 1 + 1 is always going to be 2. If you push an object, it's always going to move in a direction equal to the amount of force that you use. But human beings are going to be very different. We can both read the chapter on Malik Ambar and look at it very, very differently. I can tell you, Krishna, that I don't agree with you. I cannot say that your point of view is invalid, because your point is valid for yourself. So if we are able to recognize that there are biases and then look at gathering information from as many different sources as possible and keep ourselves focused on, okay, I am not here to judge Aurangzeb or Tipu Sultan. They're dead and gone. Yeah, what is the point of me judging them? But what I can do is I want to be remembered, and I want to be remembered well. So what did they do? What did they not do for me to practice, for me to be remembered and remembered well? That is something within my control. And I would much prefer to spend my time doing that rather than worry about, how should history be written differently and how can it be unbiased and whether he was a good king or a bad king.
Pradeep, in your chapter on Aurangzeb, and as you delve into the various facets, I mean, there's been obviously he was successful at a bunch of things that he did, but there were obviously a lot of things that one would argue weren't ideal and just didn't play out, shouldn't have happened. How would you view Aurangzeb from a leadership lens in today's world, both in terms of the successes that he had, but more importantly, where did he fail?
Thank you for asking that question, Krishna. A lot of people who have been having chats with me think that the only chapter in the book is Aurangzeb, but he's just one of the chapters. But I've got to say that was a chapter that I took a long time to write, and I did a lot of research on. If you notice, the bibliography is one of the longest for Aurangzeb compared to the others. Aurangzeb is a very, very interesting personality. And I'm very happy that he's in the book, and he certainly deserves a place in the book. Now, why should he be on the book? We cannot take away from the fact that he was a successful leader. And I'm using the word successful very, very carefully. In every business today, Krishna, the geographical reach is an extremely important metric of success. Even in our own talk, in BIC Talk, I'm sure one thing that will be very happy for us if we have X number of views or X number of people listening to it or X number of people commenting. So the numbers matter. Let's not brush around under the carpet. If you look at an organization, clearly the number of stores that it has across the country, the number of clients it services across the region or across the world is a very important indicator. The number of people it has from different countries. Or for me, one of the great success criteria in future will be number of languages Leadership Shastra is translated into. So it's a very important criteria. And in this criteria, it was during the time of Aurangzeb that the Mughal Empire was at its largest. You cannot take that away from him, number one. The second important leadership trait that Aurangzeb had was, just like I said about Guru Nanak and Shankar Deva and even Shivaji, Aurangzeb in a way led by example. He was extremely frugal. Even the money for his tomb was made from the copies of the Quran that he wrote, or from the sculptures that he stitched. We know about all this. He eschewed a lot of the pomp and pageantry, which of course would have given a lot of people money and income in those days, but which today would have seen as being very wasteful expenditures. And in many of the occasions, not in all, but in many of the occasions, he actually personally traveled with the army to as much as he could. So in all of these, leadership by example, financial frugality, in terms of the numbers, in terms of the size of the conquest, clearly he is a king who was worth emulating. But why do so many people hate him so much? Why is he such a divisive figure? It's not just with the Hindus. If you look at what happened with the Muslims in Golconda, they don't like him too much either. And also with the Hindus, if you look at his biggest campaigns, like the one he waged against Rachit Borphu Khan and the Ahoms, or even with Shivaji, it wasn't a Muslim general, it was a Hindu general who waged war. So if you go deeper against the criticism, if you strip away the religion part of it, at the psychological need and fear part, the one thing that Aurangzeb seems to have done consistently is my way or the highway. And in doing what he did, which is remarkable in terms of waging all these wars, being very successful, being not only successful, being very persistent, it came at the price of saying, if you don't do it my way, you don't have a place. I think he left people feeling very powerless. He left people not feeling respected. I think that is the core reason why his legacy did not survive after he died.
Yeah, because at some level he himself was instrumental in leading to the decline of the Mughals, and that's a big part, obviously, of his life being checkered, right, and his legacy being checkered.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. And if you look at the later Mughals on that chapter, I've looked at how it's been a mess after that. Of course, we can't blame Aurangzeb too much for it, because the Mughal way of succession was you kill the other people who you think are your immediate successors. And we say a lot about what Aurangzeb did to his father, but his father did something very similar to his brothers when he came to power. And there is a point where Aurangzeb actually says, don't trust your children. Look at what my father did in trusting Parashuko. It didn't work. So succession planning is that way an extremely important part. We know this, but it's also not so much about how much you make and what impact you make, but how you make that impact.
And I'd perhaps want to end our conversation by looking maybe a few centuries ahead. If Leadership Shastra gets written 400 years or so from now, how do you think it would look? Who might be some people? And do you think the themes will still be the same, or what might have changed dramatically, Pradeep?
Ooh, you're putting me on the hot seat now, Krishna. My hope is to do a whole series on this. And at this point of time, I want to very studiously avoid even leaders from colonial India. Because I think in India, we tend to look at our history from a very engineering or a science background of what is right and what is wrong. We are still not open to looking at historical personalities as human beings, full of grays and blacks and whites, just as much as we are. So I would rather hope that with future books in this series and whatever else I can do, we first need to change the lens with which we see the past. Once we see that, then I think it can be done. But notwithstanding that, I think there have been some really good autobiographies in the last couple of decades of very contemporary leaders, right? Politicians. And I think they've looked at it from a very fair point of view. And look, at the end of the day, like I said, Krishna, everything that a human being writes will have biases and prejudices. At the end of the day, I need to look at what I need to get from this for my performance, and then take what I can and leave what does not resonate with me. So it's a very long-winded answer to a short question. But I think I would like to leave it at that if it's okay.
Got it. On that note, Pradeep, well, thank you so much for bringing out these very different and interesting perspectives. And thank you for joining us on BIC Talks.
Thank you very much, Krishna. And I'm really happy and honored that BIC gave me this opportunity. And I wish every listener the very best for the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you like what we do, please share it with your friends and family. You can also leave us a review or rating on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is Gaurav Krishna on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandni Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. Do follow us on Instagram for updates on all our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.